What does this data tell us then about the current state of China's economy?
So I think on first glance, Tom, the number looked quite positive, rising consumer prices more than expected. But when you dig into it, you realize that the main thing causing that rise was food prices. And the main thing driving food prices was the weather. We had a lot of rain. We had extraordinarily high heat in much of the country in July. That led to food prices rising for the first month this year since January. And that was what pushed up inflation. And if you looked, things like cars, things like home appliances, things like mobile phones, prices for those things continued to drop. And if you looked at PPI, producer prices, that again continued to drop for almost 2 years in a row. And so I think it's still, this data characterizes this economy as being one with very little demand and one in which companies, businesses have very weak pricing power.
So, John, what's your understanding then of how policymakers are likely to respond to that continued challenge around the demand picture for Chinese consumers?
Well, I think we're going to get more action from the PBOC. We had an interest rate cut earlier already. We're looking out for things like a reduction in the reserve requirement for banks. We're looking out for maybe an additional interest rate cut as well. And we're also expecting more fiscal policy measures. The State Council earlier this month put out a plan that included 20 steps to help increase consumption in China. What that plan didn't have, though, was much detail in terms of what those measures would include, and it did not say how the government was going to fund those steps. And so we're looking for more when it comes to those fine details.
Yeah, on the details then front, John, because we've had the rhetoric, we've had the messaging from policymakers in Beijing, we've had the implementation of some measures as well, but so far it seems it hasn't worked, at least to the extent that many would have hoped. What is the assessment as to whether the next steps will make a difference, will move the needle?
I think if the government is going to if it's going to do the things that we're expecting it to do, I don't think in the short term it will move the needle that much. In the longer term, I think there's a possibility that China, the government is selling a lot of debt at the moment. It's sort of stocking up its fiscal firepower. There have been additional calls by economists here in China for the government to hand out coupons, so almost directly giving money to the consumer. If Beijing does do something like that, then in the longer term, you could see a turnaround. You could see people starting to feel a little bit more confident and starting to open up their wallets.